Kamini, it's Suhanya here. Can you hear me?
On.
Kamini, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Suhanya.
Yes, we are on.
We are on.
Technology has not defeated us.
Well, hello and welcome. And yes, sorry for this technical problem. We've been trying to get ourselves on as panelists, but good evening, everyone. And I'm really delighted. And I'm delighted to be in conversation with Suhanya Rafael, the director of M+, the new Center for Contemporary Visual Arts that opened just over a year ago in Hong Kong. Suhanya joined as executive director in 2016, and 3 years later was appointed director of the museum. I visited M+ earlier this year and was swept away by the vision and the execution of the project. This is truly a global museum for art, design, architecture, and moving image. And under Suhanya's leadership, M+ has seen more than 2 million visitors, despite opening smack in the middle of the pandemic. She has brought a whole range of museum experience to her current position from her former roles as Deputy Director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney, and before that at the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. She has played a significant part in foregrounding art from the Asia-Pacific region. Suhanya is also playing a lead role in the international museum world as president of CIMAM, the International Committee for Museum and Collections of Modern Art. She has many more accomplishments to her name, but it really is time to begin this conversation. So I would encourage you to read about them in the bio that we have included in the chat box. Also a reminder that at the end of this conversation, we have a few minutes for questions. So do send them into us at the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screens. And finally, we have Indian Sign Language interpretation available for us in this program, and I'd like to thank Saurabh for helping us with that. Suhanya, welcome, and thank you for being with us this evening in spite of all these glitches. Well, to begin with, I'd like you to set the context for us. As you have often said, Asia forms the visual base in which M+ operates, and at the same time, it is a museum that looks to be international. So what does it mean to straddle these two worlds and to do justice to them simultaneously?
As you mentioned in your wonderful introduction, and I'm very happy to be having this conversation with you, museums today in the 21st century, we think very carefully about what the function of the institution is, our role with communities, and how we speak and the histories we highlight. And of course, here in Hong Kong, our location informs everything that we do.
Yeah.
We draw from our context, and the voice from Hong Kong is very important. So we're in East Asia, in Greater China, and we move out from here into the world. We are very conscious of the ecology, the cultural ecology in Hong Kong as well. And it's really important that we add a voice within that space. So there are very good museums here working with, the Hong Kong Museum of Art, for example, which is deeply rooted in a local context with a mandate to build the history of Hong Kong and Hong Kong artists, as well within a historical Chinese collection, which includes very important export collection as well, export ware collection out of Chinese art history. But as an institution of the 21st century that covers these cross disciplines of design, architecture, as well as art, and film and moving image, we can really amplify the interdisciplinary role of what it means to make these collections and make exhibitions that seek to bring that, but at the same time, think about a transnational voice, a voice that brings the international in relation to how artists or makers or architects perform within our space here in Asia. It's also really good to be able to share that this is the only institution in Asia that is actually collecting design and architecture from the mid 20th century and into the future together with art. There are no Asian institutions doing this. So I hope many more will join, because Asia is half the world and we have a very dynamic histories of design and architecture that sits together with art histories. I mean, we know from institutions in India, we don't talk about crafts and photography and art in the same way that we did even 25 years ago. There is a much more complex and synthesized understanding of how these different material histories bring to bear our understanding of our lived experience today. So this is the context in which M+ is born. And our museum is called M+, which stands for Museum and More.
More, of course.
Which allows this, allows this potential.
Suhanya, when we were actually thinking, we were talking to consultants when we were opening the museum, and we asked for suggestions, and one of them said, is there any way you can remove this museum out of the name of the museum? And so I think it's very clever the way you have actually positioned M+, because it is a museum and more. Yeah.
And as you say, by removing the word itself, and it becomes emblematic, it allows you to kind of fill that space, that potential, that possibility in many ways simultaneously.
Absolutely. So Herzog and de Meuron were the architects for the building, and the architecture is quite particular in the way that it brings together different elements that contribute to the creation of the M+ identity, but not least in a very physical sense. For example, that whole sweep of terrace that runs along the waterfront, besides being aesthetic, also seems to draw the people of Hong Kong into its embrace. And I've seen young people exercising there, while I'm told older citizens practice their Tai Chi there every morning. So now that you have been open for about a year or more, how has the architecture and the spaces helped you to build a relationship with the city?
I think one of the really successful elements of this design that Herzog de Meuron provided us with was the fact that we were very clear within the brief to the architect that the institution needed to be a porous institution, an institution that worked very closely with our neighborhood. The fact that we are an institution in a park, the museum is built inside a park, a public open space, and we are in a subtropical environment, so it's hot most of the time of year. And we were very clear that we also wanted to provide spaces that were museum spaces or part of museum architecture that were interstitial, that provided shade and shelter, but also welcomed people in, so that the public spaces of the institution were welcoming communities to gather. And how they chose to use these spaces is evolving. But what's very clear is that the neighborhood, which has actually over 35,000 people within really 5 to 10 minutes walk because of the density of Hong Kong, are using us in this way 24/7, because on top of our podium, we also have a garden. And the garden also offers these beautiful views of Victoria Harbour. And of course, it houses, the tower that sits above the podium houses our LED that speaks to Hong Kong Island at night, using our collections and moving image as part of that intersection. So we are open at 10 in the morning and we close at 10 at night when the facade, the LED facade stops for the night, goes to sleep.
I know it quite, that whole facade quite dominates the skyline in that area, right? In the whole Kowloon section.
Yes, that's right. You know, Hong Kong is a city of light as well, because it's full of moving image screens. It's highly technological in that sense. But all of those screens are driven by commercial content. It's not creative content. And for us as an institution, a public museum with moving image sitting as part of our plus, if you like, what our disciplines are, the institution's architecture embodies a screen with this very large 60-meter high by 110 meters across, which we commission and work with artists to use, you know, in the city. And it's added a really important creative cultural element to all of these other very commercial screens.
Yeah. Well, you know, MAP's core collection came from its founder, Abhishek Poddar, who was a collector of Indian art. And at M+ as well, you have a significant part of the collection that comes from a collector, Uli Six. So what role has that really played in the curatorial narrative at M+?
Well, it was the founding collection for the institution, this 1,510 works that came in 2012. And established a very important core collection inside the institution. The collections have since grown to number over 8,500 objects and 50,000 archives. Because when we collect architecture, they come in fundamentally through the as archives and some of the design collections. So we now have a very substantial founding collection that was founded on the core of Uli's very important collection of avant-garde Chinese art coming out of the mainland from the early 70s, 1972 to 2012. So 40 years it spans, and it's actually a definitive collection of what is a truly exceptional moment in terms of contemporary Chinese art.
It is. I remember walking in there and seeing these amazing works of art, actually, which were quite seminal, including Ai Weiwei's beautiful terracotta pots.
That's right, the whitewash, very important work. In fact, we have probably the largest collection of Ai Weiwei in any institution in the world. And then we have two works by Weiwei on show. Actually, you know, when one of the things we were discussing was what are the 5 works that I might consider sharing with your audience in terms of the collection. And in fact, one of the works comes from the SIG collection. So when we come to it, we can talk about it.
Lovely. Okay. Well, as new museums that have opened in countries that were formerly colonized, we are looking to foreground narratives that reflect the cultures, the aspirations of our own communities. Would you like to share the role that M+ looks to play in reflecting more contemporary modes of thinking rather than art history canons that we have inherited?
Yeah, I think, you know, I remember having a very recent conversation with another museum director colleague when I said, you know, part of the work that we want to do is to expand and add to canonical histories. And he said to me, do we need a canon? Can we just get rid of it? And I've thought a lot about it, because I don't feel that you can just throw it all away. I understand that he was coming out of a North American context that's working very hard to ensure diversity and inclusiveness. But my advantage is I don't have that baggage. I have a different history that I can draw on, which is actually building something from the beginning, and knowing that that building is about amplifying our histories from this place. So when we do show the work of artists or architects that come from the West, We are decentering them in many ways and reframing them from our perspective, which is useful, important. It adds scholarship. It brings an important aspect of how we might research, but also points of view, perspectives, and our stories from here are also are actually, I do believe that they are canonical, in the sense that we are saying these are important stories and they bring in veins of thinking and historical fact that add a complexity to known histories, because we have to start from somewhere, and our place in, our location is critical part of that discussion.
Yeah. Well, we've come to my favorite part of this program, which is to invite you to walk us through 5 works that speak to you in your collection. So
yes, so we can start.
Yes.
And I have thought about which 5 to introduce you to, because there are many works. It is also by way of demonstrating the kind of breadth of the collection, and some of these maybe giving you concrete examples of some of these ideas that I've been speaking to you about. So maybe we can bring up the first slide, which is that's the last slide. So we'll start right at the top here. That's it. Which is a group of works by Zaha Hadid. So Zaha Hadid, of course, is one of the great. She's an amazing architect that comes, is Iraqi British. And the reason these works are in our collection and are right now on display, this is an example of the display, is because her first project that actually, becomes, it puts her on the world map, was this proposal that she made for the peak. In Hong Kong Island has these beautiful mountains and the peak sits on top. And this is a competition for the peak block, and she won that competition, and these are the entries. This is her conceptual drawings for competition. They are paintings because she's also artist, and this was a competition for a leisure club in Hong Kong on Victoria Peak. It was never built, but by winning this competition, it introduced her to an international architectural world and really levered her into becoming one of the great architects in the world in the late 20th century. And this series of works, which are experimental, and so they draw down on her suprematist geology, as she used to describe her interest. She was very interested in Malevich and the Russian constructivists, and so she used that language as hers to present a set of paintings as being her competition entry for the peak block. So these works are in the collection. So it gives you a very good example about how this is both art, it's architecture, it is a global dialogue, but it's also very local. Yeah. And you can see how this kind of intersects into then the collections. We have a suite of work by her, and we show them in 2 different parts of the museum's collection galleries. This set of works are in our East Quadrant, which are really, it's a group of galleries that are driven out of the design architecture collections. But we also have another painting from this suite in the Hong Kong Here and Beyond exhibition, which talks about Hong Kong. So we are able to cut and dice, if you like, and see how this artist is being seen and shown within M+. So from here, the next work that I want to show you is actually a work from The Sig-
Yes, I remember this one.
yes, it's a
The Six
very
Gallery.
large. Yeah, it is in the Sig Gallery. And this is work by Lin Tian Mao, who is a Chinese artist. This is a self-portrait. It's a very interesting idea of what a self-portrait could be. A work made in 1998, and it's part of the SIG collections in our skylight galleries, which are really the very large-scale works from that collection, when you know these artists have entered into an international global circulation. But Lin Tian Mao, of course, is one of the most important Chinese women artists continuing to work today. And the work is called braiding, because on the left is what you see from one side as you approach the work, and on the right of the screen is what you see from behind. Because it's a sculptural work in many ways, and Tian Mao works with threads. This is what she's always worked with threads and with photography, and sometimes also with, but always sculptural. It's always a sculptural practice. So what you see on the left is a self-portrait. This is Tian Mao herself, and on that surface, it's very hard to see on this picture, are these nodules. And the nodules are really a thread that's knotted in the front. And when you go behind, you can see these thousands of threads that are gathered in and then braided to make this beautiful plait that goes all the way right through to the end. And you can't quite see on this photograph, there is a very small screen, a video screen, where you see a set of hands making the plait as it's finishing with these threads, which really makes you think about, what is she saying? You know, what's the meaning of this word, of this work?
Yeah.
And I think it's many things. It's how we might construct a woman and a woman's work, a woman artist's work, the hand of an artist making as well. But also it's very bold and it's extremely present. You know, there's nothing diminutive about it. It's not small and discreet. It is very present and extremely beautiful. And it's a wonderful work to be able to stand in front of and talk to people about, because it's also such a historic piece. Because Tian Mao is probably one of the few major women artists that come out of that period where there are so many men who are, you know, the big names as well, but she is equal to that. So it's an important work.
Oh yes, I remember seeing this, and you have this contrast of the almost what looks like a shaven head and then this exquisite braid. It's like a whole curtain of lace at the back, and it's so tactile. So,
and you're right to raise that issue about, you know, a woman with, and how hair often defines womanhood as well. And the front picture is of her as with her shaved head. Yeah. It's very bold. Beautiful.
Really, it's wonderful to see that work, actually stand before it, as you said, and just interact with it. It's quite amazing because it has so many elements.
And and you can talk about it as sculpture, you can talk about it as photography, you can talk about it as video work as well, because it has that video element in it. It is incorporating so many different kinds of material in the making of the work.
Absolutely.
And then the next work that I wanted to share with you is by Kusama.
Yeah.
Actually, I think you were able to see our Kusama exhibition that we curated for our first anniversary.
I was very fortunate, yes, to see the whole retrospective.
Yeah, a very, very important retrospective actually of an artist who really is a visionary artist for our time. And if we think of who are the great artists, you know, in the late 20th century, Kusama would have to be one of those. And yeah, you know, this exhibition looked at 70 years of practice from 1945 to now, because she's still alive and she continues to make work. But this work is in our collection, and as we all know, Kusama suffers from a range of mental health problems and issues. Has been very honest and open about. She, in fact, first talks about her anxiety and her depression and her hallucinations in 1950, when she was in her early 20s, as a young artist in Tokyo. So you can imagine, you know, a very conservative society, a young woman speaking about her mental health at that time was very unconventional and very courageous, you know, because she felt that she needed to share how she was dealing with these problems. And she does suffer from anxiety, depression, as well as you know, forms of hallucination. And these are problems that she has faced by 1977, just after the completion of this work, when she decides she really does need to deal with this, and she goes into the institution. She institutionalizes herself in 1977 and has never left it. And it's interesting to think about why she did that. This is in Tokyo, because I think the institution offered her a very safe place to explore extraordinary and quite transgressive practice.
Yeah, I think it was a harbor and she felt safe there, right, in a way?
Yeah. So this work here dates from 1966 to 74, which bridges the period from New York, because she goes to New York in the late 50s, in 1958, and is there till the early 70s, when she comes back to Tokyo. And she leaves to go to New York because she tries to be an artist, you know, from 50s, all through the 50s in Tokyo, and is not successful. And she thinks, okay, I'm going to go to the center of the art world and try being an artist there. So she leaves, you know, she leaves on an aeroplane. It's the first time she gets on an aeroplane, and she looks out of the aeroplane and down onto the sea and sees the light on the surface of the sea. And it really sparks in her first really important imagining of how infinity might look like, the infinity net and dots, which is really the star. And you know, the first works are about the sea, and she talks about light and the sea in such poetic terms. And she does make these incredible monochromatic paintings while in New York, right up into the early 60s. You know, from the late 50s right through to the 60s, she makes the most amazing paintings. They are very large in scale, and they are now really part of the 20th century canon. At the time, she's not in the least successful. She's not able to make it in New York. And so she returns to Japan in the 70s, 1973. She's very poor. She's very, very sick, and knows that she has to, and she's kind of trying to regroup when she comes back to Tokyo. But she brings this work with her back to Japan. You know, even though she's very, very poor, she knows that this work is very important for her. there are these 6 mannequins, and the work is titled Self-Obliteration. And she talks about this, the gesture of obliteration as being kind of a cosmic uniting of the self with the world. And so this is, an important concept that sits through her practice all the way through, even to now. But by bringing these works back with her, she felt that they were very important. She couldn't not have them with her. So that the M+ collection, being able to acquire them was extraordinary thing for us, so we're very proud. This is like the Infinity Net paintings jumped off the canvas and onto everything, onto chairs and tables and handbags and teacups. On one hand, they're extremely joyous works. They're full of color and they're so absurd and full of joy, while at the same time they underscore, this kind of her inability to have been successful in New York. Really sat with her as something difficult that she had to face. Why is it that she couldn't make it there? We know now why. There was such prejudice against women. This is a very young Japanese woman. Everything was against her.
Oh.
But that didn't stop her. She had such courage. And the fact that in 1977 she faced her demons and said, okay, I need to go into the institution. And it's from there, she grew to make such an extraordinary career. So it's a fabulous work for us.
I enjoyed seeing it as I did the whole exhibition, Sohanya.
Yeah, so
it's one of the widest retrospectives I've seen of Kusama.
Yeah. I mean, we were able to bring things out of Japan that had never left, and also things out of her studio that she had never shared. So this was a very important show for Kusama, very important for M+ as well, because it immediately tells you that's, it's at that level that the institution has to function. We need to bring new scholarship thinking and major work into the public domain.
Yeah, and it moves next to Bilbao, correct?
That's right. It's going to the Guggenheim Bilbao. It's actually traveling right now and opens on the 27th of June. So very soon, in a few weeks, I'll be there.
Okay. So we have another work right now.
Yes, we do. When they were going from Japan to Sri Lanka, which is, where I was born. And I thought I must include a work from there, because it's, these are important works that are part of our design collection as well. So we're looking at this point, the ceiling panels that Ina De Silva made. But all of you in India will also recognize Chandigarh there on the left, and then the big, yes, we've got very significant architectural holdings from India as well, and that's Raj Rawal's.
Of course,
yeah,
there it is.
And Raj Rawal on the left and Jeffrey Bawa on the right, with his Parliament building. But Ina's work is what I want to talk about, her batik panels. And these are 6 of her batik panels that she made for the ceiling for the Benkota Beach Hotel, a large hotel outside of Colombo. And it was this is part of a long collaboration that she had with the architect Jeffrey Bawa, as well as the other artist, Barbara Sanzoni. The creative dynamic between these 3 people were extraordinary from the early 60s all the way through, and M+ has all of that ceiling in our collection. which are, I think there are over 50 of these batik panels. Make the ceiling in Bentara Beach. It's absolutely exquisite. And these panels are a collaboration that Ina had with her son, Anil Gamini, who did the drawings of nature and the rich natural life of Sri Lanka that become the subjects of Ina's work for these ceiling panels. So for us, again, it's about showing that relationship between design, art, architecture, and the cross disciplines are there. Just in this slide, actually, you can see archival material, photographic material, original architectural objects, the chair and the one part of Chandigarh, and then Ina's batiks. You know, so I just felt it was really important that we showed, in the context of what MPLUS is doing, how the region is also being spoken about. This slide is actually in a room that talks about nation building, the post-colonial nation building project, whether it's India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Japan, Korea. It's all within that room, and it's really interesting to see what that looks like. You know, what that project looks like, and where artists and architects were so intrinsic to the development of identity and a sense of selfhood.
Exactly. I think as museums and as people in the art world, I think we all understand now how the arts really are so interconnected and how each enriches the other. So placing them together really gives you that whole rich tapestry of how the arts develop.
And the kind of self-determination of the language used.
Yeah.
And I think and the choices made by those creative people, you know, and during that period from the 60s, you know, it starts actually from the 50s on, and it's a very interesting set of propositions and proposals, and really you can't see this anywhere else in the world but now at MPLUS in Hong Kong, and I'm very proud to be able to place it there. You know, it's such important context.
Absolutely.
And it's, you know, primary canonical work. It's not a footnote in someone else's history.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think my last work is a work that we commissioned for our LED screen. And it's a work called The Shape of Light by the senior Hong Kong artist Ellen Pao. And we commissioned this when we were deep in COVID. You know, we opened the museum in November 2021, and we were open for 2 months, and then we had to close between January and April. And then we reopened in April 2022. And during that period, we commissioned Ellen, so that when we reopened, this was the work that was seen. And she made this very beautiful work that used the Heart Sutra, the beautiful Buddhist sutra, as a message to the people of Hong Kong, and she is signing the Heart Sutra. So that what you're seeing is somebody signing. It's exactly what Saurabh is doing right now. But of course, in this work, maybe we can replay it while I speak about it.
Yes,
it's being signed in Chinese for our Hong Kong audiences. It's a very important site-specific work, which uses the idea of light as a transformational force, in the same way that the sutra is also that. So she is a video artist. She has been a seminal figure in Hong Kong, setting up a space called Video Taj, which was being instrumental in bringing moving image to the Hong Kong scene. And she always believed in the importance of moving image as part of artistic creation. But she also, in her day job, or when she was having to work for a living, when being an artist was not giving her a living, she's a radiographer. So she is also really interested in ray, what the ray is,
Okay.
the body and healing. So for her, this is bringing all of those varied interests together, and it just came together in such a beautiful work when she made this for Hong Kong. And it was an important moment when the institution itself was able to perform a duty around well-being,
Okay.
and provide a message of well-being as well through the screen as artist commission.
Exactly. You know, the idea of how the arts really can play a role in mental well-being, I think we all discovered that during the pandemic. And even one of the projects that we've worked on really looks at this whole intersection of arts and mental well-being.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a problem that hasn't gone away, and that we all need to work very hard to face and reach out and help where possible. And we certainly have taken that very serious. In fact, during the Kusama show, we used Kusama's exhibition also as a jumping point to talk about mental health and the need to address this in our communities, and especially in our young communities. So it's a very beautiful moment for us that we were able to work with Ellen in this way, and that she proposed this as part of the commission. You know, it's a magical thing. And of course, you can see what the museum looks like in Hong Kong Harbor, which is, you know, it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, really.
Yeah. And that is a lovely location. It's quite magical when you stand on the terrace and you look out onto the waters and the lights, and yeah, it is quite beautiful. Okay, since we are talking about the location and region, we are located in Asia that is seeing dramatic developments both economically and culturally. In fact, Asia's emergence in a leadership role is being seen as imminent. We already have 50% of the world's internet users in this region. So how do you see this shift impacting the roles that museums can play?
I think our, the museum is now, such an important civic space. You know, it's a place for people, and for people to gather, for people to learn, for people to be challenged, for people to feel that they can encounter new ideas, as much as reflect on histories. You know, we play many roles now, and it's also very clear that certainly in Asia, where the museum is growing and new museums are growing, with collections from our varied locations, that the institution is building significant audiences. The digital audience, the virtual audience, is as important as the physical. And, you know, we are on 9 different social media channels at M+.
Good God.
5 of them that are, you know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on, what we're used to across the globe. And then through 4 channels that are just for mainland. So we have to speak to mainland audiences within the context of China, and those mainland audiences we're reaching. I think now the reaches over 40 million into the mainland. It's very significant. It's an audience that is extremely serious, very, very engaged. And now with the borders open in Hong Kong, we've seen a significant rise in mainland audiences coming into M+. Something like 40% of our audience now is mainland audiences. And we've also realized that our audiences are young. Their ages between 18 to 44. 77% of our audience is in that age bracket. And that includes mainland audience. So they're very young and very eager to learn and very serious about the encounter with the institution and our collections.
And how many languages do you use in your exhibitions and things like that? Is it multilingual, or I think there are 3 languages, right?
Yes, 3 languages. We work with 3 languages. So the spoken languages are Cantonese, Mandarin or Putonghua, and English, because this is very, very common here. But we also have docents, and some of our docents are Japanese speaking as well as French speaking, because these are also substantial, smaller minority communities in Hong Kong. Being multilingual is without question. We have to be.
Yeah, but we're also living in a time of great unrest, Suhanya, both social, political, across the globe. We've seen communities rocked by protests, whether it's related to racism, authoritarianism, economic inequalities. And we've also seen the impact it has had on the museum world. Hong Kong experienced great turbulence as well. And what has that meant for a museum like M+, and what are the strategies that have helped you cope?
I think, when we opened the museum in November 2021, the response, the immediate response to the institution, we had done a lot of work to build audience base, but I think it was, because of COVID, we were a city where all the borders were closed. So it was only Hong Kongers that were here, and all of us who have Hong Kong ID cards working in the city.
Okay.
The response to the museum was so overwhelming that I felt that this was part of the institution's role in providing this framework, a safe space to think about who we are, a space to reflect on our histories, a place to think about bridging differences. And the institution, by being M+, that power of plus for us, we have thought so much about how to ensure that we reach to many audiences and understand that art and culture provide a really significant platform to reflect on our lived realities. And I think coming out of the 2019 environment of protest, then 2020 COVID, zero COVID policy that made us a city that had to speak to each other very profoundly, has also helped us then think about how do we bridge once we then reopen the city. And we've literally only reopened the city since early March.
Yes.
So it's really only 3 months.
Yeah.
Unlike being, say, a city in the mainland where you're connected to 1.5 billion people, we were just a city talking to each other, 7.5 million people for three years. It's a long time. It's a long time.
I know.
But we opened a museum, and actually we've been able to, since the borders opened in March, we have had another 1.1 million people through the museum.
All I can remember about M Plus is that the galleries and the whole place was full of people. So you can obviously see that everyone's engaging.
I mean, they're engaging emphatically.
Yeah. How rewarding is that when you open a museum and you're always wondering, will there be crowds? Will it work? Will they connect? And then it's so rewarding to actually see them fill the
Yes.
museum spaces.
It's extremely rewarding. You know, for all of us, we felt the affirmation of the audience was extremely important. And you know, a museum without people is like a person without a soul. Right?
Absolutely.
It is, you can't have one without the other.
Yeah. You know, what I find captivating about M Plus is really the diversity of the collection. There's just this whole range of the visual arts. Like you've shown us the moving image, architecture, design, visual arts. And Suhanya, I remember this incredible sushi bar that is part of the display in those galleries. You know,
Yes.
the Japanese artist Kuramata's sushi bar that was dismantled
Yes.
and brought piece by piece from Tokyo to Hong Kong. So I wanted you to tell us more about the museum's approach and why it considered it important for an iconic space to be saved as an object to cherish and study, as one critic put it.
Yeah, so you know, the Kurumada sushi bar was saved by M Plus because it would have been demolished and lost. And it was a major acquisition for the museum, and therefore it's, you know, on semi-permanent display. We can't really take it down because it's such an important acquisition. And it's also about saying, as a museum of architecture, it's the one work where we have one-to-one piece of design, and it's a piece of commercial design, and a piece of commercial design coming out of Japan that is an iconic piece of modern design by an iconic Japanese experimental architect, Shiro Kuramata. And it's like almost a pilgrim site now for so many of those architecture students who come to study it, because it's about a completely concentrated expression of Kuramata's design aesthetic, whether it's about color or material choice, because within that sushi bar, you have stonework, glasswork, woodwork, and how he works with light. And every element of that sushi bar, he designed, including the choice of color and this exuberant color, but that's also utterly minimal in its expression. Yes. It's a very focused, pared back, you know, in that Japanese sense, very essential. You know, it goes right down to the most important, least ornamental, but at the same time, exquisite design.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Suhanya, I just wanted you to tell us a little about yourself. I mean, you are Sri Lankan. And I wanted to know, a large part of your career was in Australia.
That's right.
And now in Southeast Asia, establishing, you know, one of the most significant museums in this region. So what has this rich tapestry of experiences brought to you, both as an individual and both in a personal and a professional sense?
You know, I think when I look at my career and I think about, you know, how I came into working in the arts, I have to thank my parents, both my mother and my father. My father was a doctor, my mother was a musician. And they actually commissioned Jeffrey Bauer to make a beautiful home that I grew up in Sri Lanka. So I was already surrounded by, you know, the idea of creativity. Because we all learned music, of course, there's no question. And we were surrounded by artists and architects and arguments about the importance of culture to have a cultured world, a sophisticated cultured world required artists to be intrinsic part of that world. So when my parents migrated to Australia in 1974, as a result of the unrest in Sri Lanka, which continues to, struggle with finding its economic footing now, goes through these highs and lows. But when my parents migrated to Australia and to Sydney, I decided to study art history at Sydney University. And at the time when I was studying art history, we were studying, and this is in Australia, we were studying European art history. Okay. We weren't even studying Australian art history. And I remember, thinking about it, but not really understanding what it really meant. But in true Australian style, I went to the UK, as a I spent, my 21st birthday there actually. And I volunteered at the Tate. At the time, there was only one Tate, which was in Millbank, what we call Tate Britain now. Okay. And I remember working on a pre-Raphaelite exhibition and then being asked to work on what became Tate St. Ives, the gift by Barbara Hepworth and Ben Nicholson. But all the time while I was there thinking, I want to work with culture and the arts, but I can't see myself in any of this. So then I left the Tate and I was working with the pre-modern, the historical, because London was the center for all of that. And I was in a little conservation studio working with antiquities, Greco-Roman antiquities and Southeast Asian antiquities. But I again felt that this was not about me. This is about a past, which I adore and love, but it was still not reflecting my reality. So when I returned to Australia, I went to Queensland, who had begun a project called the Asia Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art. It was 1994 when I joined the gallery there as a researcher, because I just knocked on the door of Queensland Art Gallery and said, you need me. This is exactly what I want to be working on. And they said, come on in. And it was fantastic because it was an institution that knew that it needed people like me from the diaspora that were interested in a contemporary conversation, a conversation about what it means to be making work from our time. And I spent almost 20 years in Queensland developing a collection, working on that project, the Triennial, which happened every 3 years, which gave us this beat that allowed research, travel, networking, and growing a significant collection, but also a knowledge base and a shared collegial group of professionals that still are very close contacts for me, that shaped my thinking, and it has never stopped. So coming to Hong Kong to be the museum director, to deliver an institution that is deeply embedded in bringing our histories to the front, I think as if my whole career was leading towards it. It was never an intention, it was certainly not conscious, but for sure I wanted to change the nature of our discourse, and I wanted to be part of it. And whatever it is, in this very divided and highly volatile world, I feel as if MPLUS is on the sharp end of making history.
So I think we have time for one or two quick audience questions. So one question is, in such a polarized world, what is MPLUS doing to make the museum more accessible and inclusive?
Well, I mean, our accessible in many ways. I guess, first of all, audience space is very wide. Since we've opened, we have had almost 3.7 million people through, which is extraordinary number. So already it is open and accessible to people. Languages is also very, very important. As an institution, we embody diversity. There are 27 different nationalities inside M+. We have 15 different language capacities, whether it's Shanghainese, Japanese, Korean, French, Swiss, German. They're all inside the institution, and I feel very proud of that diversity. We are also extremely committed to accessibility in terms of sign language, vision impaired. So all of our online content, our digital footprint is completely accessible in relation to vision impaired. So we are deeply committed to that diversity as part of what we do. And of course, how we think about gender, LGBTQ, we continually think about these stories, these histories within the context of our collections and exhibitions, research, publishing.
Okay, there's another question here. Given Hong Kong's unique culture, both historical and contemporary, as a trading center, and therefore in terms of cultural exchange, how does M+ define or explore this relationship with its location and the city?
It's a really good question. I often think, why didn't a museum like M+ come out of, say, Tokyo or Seoul or Shanghai this time? But it hasn't. And it's been Hong Kong that's done it. And I think Hong Kong has done it precisely because of this observation. The fact that being a place of movement, it's a very dynamic city, and it has always been a place where ideas traveled through, people have traveled through, and this sense of movement, of histories, of communities, people leaving and coming back. It has defined the city's character. And I think the fact that the people of Hong Kong made M+, which is exactly that, because the formation of their institution was long in gestation that included 3 years of public consultation, asking the people of Hong Kong in what they wanted. And this was, 15 years ago. So those first 3 years was just asking, what kind of institution do you want? And people wanted an institution for moving image, for design, for art, and for ink art. And the advisory committee advised the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority Board to make one large institution that incorporated all of those disciplines instead of lots of little ones. But they couldn't decide on what to describe it. That's how we got our name, M for museum and more. They knew that it had to be a museum and more, because it would be in the 21st century that it would be realized. And so this emblem, which was really actually a placeholder on the report, M for museum plus for more, has become who we are. So it's very interesting that our situation has shaped what the institution, the spirit of the institution, as much as the vision of the institution.
Well, that's a lovely point to end our conversation on, Suhana, and it's been so lovely to chat again. To me, I think M+ really is one of the most significant museums that has come up in recent times. And I think it is wonderful for this part of the world, especially, to have an institution like this, and one that we can all enjoy and be inspired from. So thank you for the wonderful job you've done there. And thank you for talking to us this evening.
Thank you, Kamini, and an invitation to all your viewers and your audiences to come to Hong Kong and experience M+. But go online as well, because there's a lot to see there too. just like you do. Yeah.
So thank you so much, and everybody for watching, and good night. Until the